Trader Joe's.
Good evening, everyone. We will open the November 13th council meeting. Roll call show. All members except for Judy Sullivan are present. Judy is under the weather this evening. And next item on the agenda is to welcome and swear in our newest council member, Lori Osher. So I'll ask Shelley and Lori if you would go down in front.
According to the Constitution, the laws of the state, and the Orono Charter and ordinances. You're going to sign. Congratulations. This will be on final things. We'd like to do for you. Okay, thank you.
We'll welcome Lori and we'll move right into the exciting stuff of the evening. Number 3 on the agenda is agenda review. I don't think we have anything to add. Does any council have anything to add? No? All right, moving on to approval of minutes of October 16th and November 6th, 2017 council meetings.
Move approval. Second.
All right, any comments, corrections, issues? Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of approval of the minutes? It's okay, passes unanimously. Moving on to public hearings. Public hearing A, to consider a vitulers license for DMCP Group LLC doing business as Dunkin' Donuts, 3 Stillwater Avenue. Mr. Mylan.
Hi, good evening, folks. I'm Dave Mylan, the Director of Community Development, and I am happy to report to you that all the inspections have been completed for this application. Personal property taxes and sewer fees are current.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak for or against the issuing of this license? All right, hearing none. Close public hearing A. Move on to public hearing B. To consider a vitulers license for Nest Coffee LLC, 24 Main Street.
All the inspections have been completed. I've tasted their donuts and goods. They're very, very good. Oh, by the way, personal property tax and sewer fees are current.
And would you recommend approval?
I highly recommend their food.
Anyone in the public wish to speak for or against the issuing of this license? All right, hearing none. Close public hearing B. Move on to public hearing C, to consider a Class 1 malt, spirituous, and vinous liquor license and vitulers license for Farnsworth Enterprises, Inc., doing business as Pat's Pizza, 11 Mill Street. Dave?
It's good to know I've been there too. And so all the inspections have been completed. Personal property tax and sewer fees are current.
Great. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the issuing of this license? This was the meal at home this evening, so I hope there wasn't a conflict. Close public hearing C. Move on to public hearing D. To consider ordinance amendments to the Town of Orono Ordinances, Chapter 18, Land Use, Section 18-112, Main Street Office Overlay District, establishing the Main Street Office Overlay District. Evan will give us a presentation, and then we'll take public input.
Thank you, Evan Rickert, consultant to the town. This is a question that arrives out of the comprehensive plan that was adopted by the town in 2015 and is one of the items that has been in the implementation phase now for some time. I'll go through not a long presentation, but a presentation that will describe the process and some of the substance of the proposed ordinance, and then take questions as you'd like, or take questions along the way if you'd like. If I do this, am I okay? Yeah. Okay. The corridor we're talking about is slightly different from this map. You see the red rectangle, polygon. Extend from Jupiter Street to Kelly Road, not to Old Kelly Road, just to Kelly Road, but 300 feet either side. That's the corridor, and the existing zoning in that corridor, Juniper to Kelly Road, not Old Kelly Road, is mostly medium density residential. That's the brownish colors there you see. You see Johnny Mac Brook coming across, that's the green resource protection zone. Then there's some reddish or pinkish colors. Those are commercial, small commercial 2 districts. The use of the corridor, as you all are familiar just by driving it every day or walking it every day and observing it, is mostly single family, and that's represented by the yellow color. There is a mix of multifamily, 2-family, multifamily in the corridor, and then also several commercial enterprises, and there's the blue little square that you see at the end of Page Place is now commercial enterprises as well. At the time we did this inventory, it was the state police barracks, so it was institutional. So it's a mixed use neighborhood, but primarily residential, and among the residential, primarily single family. Currently, there is limited flexibility in the current zoning. It's mostly medium density residential, which allows, it's basically a 1- and 2-family zoning district. There are some things that you can do besides 1- and 2-family homes. You can have a home occupation, such as Alpenglow is. You can apply for a zoning change. Most likely it would be a contract zone, and that's happened twice in this corridor in the last 10 years. One for Rainstorm and one for the St. Mary's Church complex. That's a fairly demanding process by design to get through a contract zone, and there are certain standards that have to be met in order for the council to both negotiate and approve one. The third possibility is that there was a use in the that might be non-conforming, i.e. not legally allowed under the ordinance today, but was legally allowed prior to. And that use can convert to another non-conforming use that is no more harmful or no more burdensome or no more of nuisance, so-called, not that they usually are, to the neighboring properties. But there are a couple of properties in the corridor in that situation. Other than that, properties are fairly frozen in their use in the residential 1- and 2-family realm. The comprehensive plan adopted in 2015, and I should say that the comprehensive plan process, as you will recall, included 5 public forums, and this downtown and Main Street was the focus of one of those forums, in which we began to develop some of the ideas and proposals that developed out here. It also involved public hearings by the Comprehensive Plan Committee and by the council before it was adopted. So there was a fair amount of public input during this stage, but the policies were at a fairly high level also. But at the time, the Comprehensive Plan Committee recommended and the council adopted the policy of creating a Main Street overlay district that would allow some flexibility of use in the corridor that would be in the terminology of low impact non-residential uses with architectural preservation standards. The Comprehensive Plan Committee considered, discussed at the forums, discussed with the council several approaches to the corridor, historic preservation districts, you know, fairly heavy regulatory mechanism, so forth. What was arrived at was an incentive-based system targeted at properties that had particular features that created an important corridor coming into town, historically, architecturally, visually. But it's an incentive base, as I will describe in a minute. The reasons for the concern at all, to begin with, why the Comprehensive Plan Committee was considering it at all, is that this is a recognized historic district on the National Register from Maplewood to Pine. That's a little bit of that is already zoned village commercial, but from Juniper out, it's primarily MDR. It is a historic district, but it's an unregulated historic district. We don't have a historic preservation ordinance. There is, you know, other than a Maine DOT come in with federal dollars and wanting to do something, they would have to respect the fact that it is a historic district. But other than that, there are no rules or regulations, and the corridors survived just fine for many, many years without a historic preservation district. But nevertheless, fact is, the district has no standards, local standards, that might guide its use and redevelopment over time. In addition to the historic district, we have, through a architectural historian, identified 34 other structures that are exemplary or noteworthy, in some cases even historical, and from the context of 2017. The historic district was established in 1977, so that was 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, a building built in the 1920s or 30s would be looked at differently than it would be today. And there are other important elements of the street that make it a really valuable, very important gateway into Orono, and create the first impressions for anybody coming to town, whether looking to come to school here or start business or to shop here or recreate here. So the concern within the Comprehensive Plan Committee at the time, and remember the committee was working from 2012 to 2014, at the tail end, well, during the recovery period of the recession, but that recovery was very slow, especially in the real estate market. So there was concern about wondering whether the single-family use trend would continue to be strong in this corridor, in a corridor where the traffic is at 12,000 cars a day, where there's a financial demands to for the upkeep of some of these larger homes. It was recognized that there were no requirements for any part of a building to be preserved historically, or even entire buildings to be preserved. A couple have been torn down or lost to fire, but otherwise it has been preserved. But there's concern that that might change. There had been at least a half dozen requests or serious conversations with either the planning board or staff about how can I find a way to reuse this property for something besides what the zoning currently allows. And it was also recognized that micro-business is a really important element of our economy here in Orono, and that Main Street might be a place that might be suitable for micro-business. And this was against the background of a fairly high level of vacancy at that time in the corridor, or homes for sale. They weren't necessarily vacant, but there were 10 to 12% of the properties were for sale, and for some period of time they were not moving. This was the tail end of that recession. That's changed. The recovery has been much stronger from 2014 to today, and there are only today a few buildings for sale, and most of the ones that were for sale, in fact, I think went for single-family homes. There were a couple that didn't, that went through this flexibility process that took advantage of some of the flexibility we had to do something else. But for the most part, it has been pretty high quality, status quo. And for that reason, what we heard in subsequent discussions with the public was that maybe there's not actually a problem there today at all, at least until the next recession, and those things do come around in cycles. So the process and products, we did, starting in the summer of 2016, we contracted with Malcolm Collins, who's a very well-respected architect who does a lot of work on historic architecture, to do a reconnaissance survey from the street to tell us what the state of play was architecturally, in addition to what we already knew from the 1977 designation of the Main Street Historic District. And he identified sort of a building by building inventory which ones might be exemplars of that particular kind of architecture above and beyond the 1977 district units. He prepared a design guide that is referenced in the proposed ordinance, but in any case could also be a freestanding guide for anybody who has interest in this. It's a very good guide that talks about the architectural styles of the key styles in the corridor and what makes them important, and the elements of the buildings that distinguish them in their particular style. We held our first corridor-wide meeting with invitations to all the residents of the corridor, property owners, and the abutters in September of 2016, and had pretty good attendance, got some initial input, kind of split between why do we even need this, and we're kind of worried about any idea of non-residential creeping into the corridor, to about half saying, we need some flexibility. Out of that, we got 5 volunteers from that meeting to serve as an advisory group in the corridor, and we met monthly for 6 months for me to get advice and help identify what this ordinance should be covering and what it shouldn't be covering. That had a fairly strong impact on ratcheting down the ordinance in ways that I will tell you in a minute, arriving ultimately at a proposal which has been further ratcheted down since then, but it had a strong effect on what we ended up with. It was a good group of people who were sort of on both sides of the issue, or different points of view, and they came together in a very rational kind of way. So it went through several versions and revisions, and then we held a second corridor meeting at the end of that process in the spring of 2016. And at that meeting, I think I'm fair to say there was more concern about why we're doing this, and be very careful about any kind of commercial intrusion, especially anything that had to do with retail or service or traffic-oriented businesses. And there are few people there at that meeting who were still saying we need flexibility, but I think the preponderance of the discussion was from people who felt that urged caution about going too far or even going at all. Ultimately, this became the office overlay district. The various other non-residential categories of uses, retail, services, artisan workshops, those sorts of things that might have been allowed under the earlier versions were taken out, and this was now limited just to office. And the council held a workshop on it, referred it to the planning board as an office overlay district. The planning board held its own workshop, held its own public hearing, got further input, and based on that input, added another requirement, another limitation to try to retain residential, not to erode the residential character of the corridor, and that is that you could have a building that had an office in it that would not otherwise be allowed as long as it met standards, but there has to be a residential unit on the property as well. It can't be just office if you're going to take advantage of this district. So the proposal changed in these ways as a result of substantial public input. The several categories of non-residential use got boiled down to office use only. We went from a more extensive architectural review to a review that will be only limited to large-scale items, what our friend Dave Mylan calls 25 by 25, meaning you can see it and recognize it going 25 miles an hour from 25 feet away, because that's what leaves the impression. It's not a historic preservation ordinance. This is really trying to make sure that the character of the town, of that part of town, remains as it is today. The architectural standards originally were going to apply to all renovations of so-called contributing buildings, those buildings that were deemed historic or contributing in another way. Standards now will only apply to these large-scale, will only apply if office use is proposed. So, no office use proposed, that none of this is really relevant. None of this affects them directly in terms of the use of their property or what they can and can't do with their buildings. Originally, no residential use was required. It could be just all office in a building. Now a residential component must be included on the property. And originally there were no standards for those other buildings in the corridor that were not contributing in the sense that they're not historic architectural buildings or they're not landmark exemplars of an architectural style. And that has now gone, based again on public input that we got, that there would, if they chose to take advantage of the additional office use rights, then they'd have to comply with some basic property maintenance standards. So, in broad outline, the district would allow any use currently allowed in the medium density residential district, which is its current zone. This will only apply, by the way, to properties that are in the medium density residential district with addresses on Main Street. So if it's a corner lot with an address on Page Place or on one of the other side streets, it doesn't apply. And if it's not in the MDR district, this is applied to the MDR district properties that have an address on Main Street between Juniper and Kelly Road. The office use would require a residential unit in the building as well, would not affect home occupations as they currently stand. The dimensional standards, that is the lot sizes and building heights and things like that, would be the same as in the medium density residential district, no change there, except minimum street frontage would be 125 feet. One of the things we really learned about this corridor when we really looked at it was a relative spaciousness, not huge, but relative spaciousness that gives it a certain, has a certain visual impact as you are coming into town and leaves an impression. There are provisions built into the standards relating to non-conforming lots and non-conforming uses. Even if you want office use in on a property, there would be limits. It could occupy no more than 2,500 square feet of office of floor area. They could have no additional driveways onto Main Street unless there was a clear health safety reason for doing so. cannot have more than 10 parking spaces associated with the office use, and that those spaces would have to be to the side or rear of the building with vegetative buffers with two adjacent properties. No more than 40% impervious coverage of the lot, so there's still room for yards and landscaping. And one small sign. If it's a multi-tenant building, you could have a directory sign at the door. It also incorporates as the trade-off, so it's, remember, this is an incentive-based thing. You don't have to do it at all, but if you want to have an office on your property that meets these standards, then the trade-off is you agree to help maintain the visual integrity of the corridor. And just a quick background on that, a quick look at the design guide. There are several significant architectural styles on Main Street, both within the current historic district and outside of it, or within the historic district but not included as a contributing building in the district. There's the Federalist style, and I'm not going to go through any of these in detail. They're all nicely described in this manual. Federalist style, Greek Revival, Italianate, Queen Anne, a couple of versions of colonial revival, including ones with shingle style elements and Dutch colonial. The Four Square, the Bangor box, the Craftsman or bungalow, and some of the early ranch homes, which became, such an important part of the development of the United States generally, but also this corridor. There are 49 of these properties that either are identified in the 1976 Historic District designation or were identified by Mac Collins as architecturally important as of 2017. And they're in the red and yellow colors. 49 out of about, I think there's 87 or 88 properties in the corridor altogether. Now, each of these styles has distinguishing large features. Their overall height, dimensions, and orientation are very distinct, one style to another. Their roof lines and dormers and chimneys, these are the large items that you can see at 25 miles per hour. You absorb them in your visual mind as you're passing through from a little short distance. The roof lines, the dormers, the chimneys, the entrances, how the entrances, the porches, vestibules, porticos, and columns are arranged. The front door locations and how they relate to the windows, the porches, and the facade of the building, and the cladding and color of the buildings. Each also has distinguishing detail. These are what you find in all historic preservation ordinances, such as you see in Bangor and Hamden and other communities around Maine that have historic preservation ordinances. They're really important to the architecture. They're not so important to first impressions or visual appeal as you're moving 25 miles per hour, 25 feet. I think you would take more notice of them if you're walking. But if they are things like the arrangement of window lights, so Federalist 6/6 lights versus a Bangor box, which might be 6/1 lights, or their Italianates, which might be 2/2s. There are trims at the cornices and sills and over some of the windows. Some beautiful Italianate homes in this corridor with those wonderful details. And then there are door details, how they're designed with their own arrangement of window lights and columns and trim. So with that very brief background, back to the visual compatibility standards that are in the proposed ordinance, renovations or additions would apply to those 49 contributing properties, but only if the property owner pursues an office use. And they would relate only to the large-scale features that are visible from a street. So that's usually going to be 2 or 3 sides, but only the large-scale features. Does not affect the ordinary maintenance, of buildings in any case. And there would be an as closely as possible test, so that if a window, if there were going to be, renovation of the roofs or chimneys and so forth, the closely as possible means commercially available. So the idea is you don't have to go out and get custom work or custom mill work. As to construction of new principal or accessory buildings, if there are any, we don't get much of that new construction in this quarter because most of the quarter is developed. But if there were, there would be a series of standards for any new principal or accessory building relating to building orientation, height, roof form, and window and door sizes and spacing as they relate to nearby properties. So it doesn't, so it's compatible. And as to property maintenance, it would apply to any property, but only if it pursues an office use. And there's a series of standards drawn from the International Building Code property maintenance ordinance relating mostly to health and safety things, but that have visual impacts as well. Any proposed office use would apply to the planning board for review to assure compatibility, compliance with the standards. It would follow the same procedures as for site plan review, which means notifying neighbors and public hearing. And the planning board could seek assistance from a qualified architect as part of the application fee if they felt that was necessary. So that is it.
Thank you, Evan. Now we will take any comments or questions from the public regarding this matter. Does anyone have any comments? Yes, please. And if you would just state your name for the record.
Absolutely. My name is Mark Brewer. I'm an Orono resident, and I think I've said this multiple times in early stages of this meeting that my preferred option would be to do nothing. I was one of the voices that Mr. Rickert was describing, saying there wasn't necessarily a need for this. That being said, I'm mostly supportive of the changes that have been made in the process so far to make it far more palatable than the original plan that was presented. I guess the one thing that I think is still lacking that would be a crucial part would be to have the owner occupancy component there. I think the residential use part is important, it's an improvement for sure. That being said, there is no...
Yeah.
Can I just get some clarification from about your comment? When you say owner occupancy, you mean residential occupancy?
Residential occupancy,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, the residential component I think is important, but adding that so it's the owner that is occupying as a residence.
As a resident?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter? All right, hearing none, I will close public hearing D. Thank you very much, and move on to public hearing E. To consider ordinance amendments to the Town of Orono Ordinances, Chapter 18, Land Use, Section 18-31, Definitions, and Section 18-150, Student Homes, to define and incorporate student home as a land use. Evan.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Evan Rickert. This is another measure implementing a piece of the comprehensive plan. It's an incremental step in the direction to address the concerns and policy recommendations of the comprehensive plan, in which there was an attempt to find the right balance for integrating student homes, student housing into established neighborhoods. We heard during the comprehensive planning process, and I know you've heard periodically over many years, times of concern that certain neighborhoods were being disrupted by an imbalance in the conversion of heretofore occupied, single-family occupied homes, owner-occupied homes with student rentals. What this is proposing, and the comprehensive plan talks about that at some length, the comprehensive plan committee pushed staff to really look far and wide nationally and at models, at how other college towns do things. We have staff with Dave Milan and Sophie and Bell and others. Staff went down and visited Durham, and so we've been looking at this for some time. This is an incremental step that creates some options in the future should the town want to do anything else. It may not want to. So what it does, though, is it defines what a student home is. It makes student home an actual land use, distinct from a multifamily dwelling or a single-family dwelling or a rooming house. It's a student home would become a defined land use. This is a method that a number of university towns elsewhere in the country have used with some success. In the process, we have to define student for the sole purpose of this ordinance, not for the purpose of replacing Noah Webster. Or our own intuition about what a student is, but rather a student for the sole purpose of recognizing a student home as a land use would be an individual who is attending or is accepted admission to attend as an undergraduate student in an institution of higher learning. So a graduate student would not be a student in this case. It would have to be an undergraduate student. And a student home then is a dwelling in which one or more of the dwelling units is occupied by 3 or more students, and at least one of whom is paying rent or a lease fee to live there. There are some exemptions, some exceptions to this, because you don't want to have a bunch of hopefully unintended consequences. For example, if it's a family of children living with their parents and going to UMaine, that would not be a student home. So there are 4 or 5 exceptions listed here saying, no, we don't mean this. These are not caught in that particular net. So now that defined, and now it becomes a land use, what do you do with it? Well, we're not doing much with it. It just becomes a land use, just like an office is a land use or a daycare center is a land use, which means that it can be identified as allowed or not allowed in certain zoning districts, and it can have performance standards associated with it, just like many land uses do in our ordinance. In this case, for any new student home, not any existing, but any new student home to be created, that property owner who wants to create the student home would need to get a certificate of occupancy from the code enforcement officer, and before issuing that certificate, the code enforcement officer has to be satisfied that the property is meeting the housing code and fire code standards, the minimum health and safety codes of the town and state. And the property owner would have to be registered under our rental unit registration ordinance. So that's really all there is. The planning board held its public hearing on it and had really good discussion about it and wanted to make clear, so this was added and in the draft that's before you, that this is a one-time thing, that a property owner could rent to students in a way that makes that a student home today. 3 years from now, they might rent to professors who are here on sabbatical visiting, and then go back to student home, but they only have to get their certificate of occupancy the first time. As an allowed use at this point, it would just be allowed everywhere that the form of housing that they're located in is allowed. And They would have to continue to comply as they do now with the limits on unrelated persons living in a single dwelling unit that we've had in our ordinance for some time. So that's it. This gives you or a future council, should the need ever arise, the ability to do more with that if you wanted to, because now it's a defined land use. May never need to.
Thank
Stuart Dexter, Fenwood Street. I'm not sure what this all means, but it sounds to me that you're opening the door to all the single resident houses for student housing. Now, maybe I misunderstand that, but the end of my street is 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, student houses. Student housing to me means as many students that want to live in there will live in there. There's 5 or 6 on the corner of Gilbert and Main Street, and there's a new one at 4 Gilbert Street. It's a single-family house. It probably was for years because Sam Cezak used to live there. There's anywhere from 4 to 6 to 7 cars there anytime you want to go by. Now that is not a single-family house that is limited. I think I heard him say that these houses were for 3 or more. Well, that's what I thought I heard, but
maximum of 3 unrelated individuals.
I heard that, but before that I heard open for 3 or more. But that might have been a different type of a house or something, I don't know. But anyway, that whole intersection, Mainwood, Gilbert, Maplewood, Cedarwood, Main Street, is all student housing. There's 1 house, 2 houses, 3 that I can mention a single-family house. The rest of them are student housing, no matter what you call it. And I think it sounds to me like this, whatever you're doing is opening up, especially an area like between Mainwood and Gilbert Street, because they are all single-family houses, and as soon as one goes up, one of these absentee landlords are coming in, making a purchase price on it. Every time I see the for sale sign go up, and one just went up in the neighborhood, I'm afraid it's going to be student housing. Now, you get, I have a problem with student housing, 2 ways. Now, student housing with not more than 3 students probably are some of your best neighbors you'll have compared to a family with 3 or 4 teenagers that are running all over the neighborhood. So I have a problem there, as you like to have your neighborhood quiet, especially when you get old like me, I guess. I don't know. So I think, I don't know these absentee landlords, but I'm sure they got their eye on Orono for every single house that comes up for sale. I'm afraid that I've got 3 houses I'm looking at right now that once the person moves out and puts it up for sale, it's going to be 4 or 5, 6 students living in it. So I don't know. It's hard to enforce. The only way you can really get an idea how many are living in there is drive around at about 2 o'clock in the morning and count the cars in the driveway. Now, and this one on 4 Gilbert Street really bothers me because it's a little driveway, it's a regular driveway, and it goes into the garage, and there's 6 or 7 cars there on the lawn. One car is not out on Gilbert Street, but very close to it. And I don't know how they park them in there, but anyway. So I don't know if I'm talking for this ordinance or against it, but I think you ought to be very concerned about single-family houses that come up for sale, and maybe some strong way to enforce 3 or less unrelated. I don't know how you can enforce that.
Thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I really appreciate Stu's comments. This is, just to clarify, just to make sure that there's not a misunderstanding. Right now, the town, for better or worse, and there are differing opinions, is open to student housing everywhere, anywhere and everywhere, what we're calling student homes. There are limits on unrelated persons by zoning district, but the town is pretty open. The only way we could determine that if you want to control the numbers in any given street or any given neighborhood is by defining student home as a land use. Then you can control it by zone, you can control it by performance standards, you can employ strategies such as the comprehensive plan actually has recommended, which is to limit the number of student homes in ways that a number of other college towns in the United States have done. This ordinance doesn't take that next step, but it makes it possible for you to take that next step should you decide that it's important to do so, you know, after getting good public input and debate about that. Because I think everybody understands that students are a really important part of our town, and it's just a matter of how do you integrate student housing with the neighborhood. You know, where's the tipping point? How do you stay away from that tipping point? And part of it's enforcement, and I know Dave Milan and Bill have been really working at that for last couple of years, and part of it's parking, and you've worked on strengthening some of the parking standards, and we've clarified some of that, and so forth. So, but this is a step towards potentially more restriction on student home. Makes it possible, but it doesn't take that step other than for public health safety of the building itself.
Actually, can I, Evan, well, while you're here, can I grab you? I know that in committee we did speak a little bit about, I think Judy brought up the issue of the certificate of occupancy being grandfathered, so that if you weren't a new landlord, then you wouldn't have to apply for one. And she raised the point of perhaps we should consider adding the 5-year. Just because we're in the public forum here with all of the microphones and everything, can you talk a little bit about what that would entail?
You could certainly do that here. This is a land use ordinance. It's not a building code or fire code ordinance or a housing code ordinance. And I'm hesitant to mix the two very much because it gets complex. The land use ordinance here basically says to become a student home, to become that land use, you need a certificate of occupancy. And as is typical of most land use ordinances, it grandfathers things that have legally existed up to this point. You could say that in 5 years, anything has to get a certificate of occupancy, but I would ask whether that wouldn't be more appropriate for building code or housing code section of the ordinance, where there might actually be established a cycle of inspections and so forth, which I know the office of our office wants to do, and the fire department wants to do, and I think Sophie wants to do, find a way to do that. And that's probably a more appropriate place for it, and keep that code compliance stuff separate from what creates a land use.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? All right, if not, I will close public hearing E. Thank you very much, everyone.
Before we go on, could I just ask, is there a date when we're going to be dealing with these items again after we've received some public input? We're going to look at them again, I assume, before we take any action on them?
We are at the community development, the comp plan implementation meeting, which is the 27th Monday. Is that a Monday? Whatever that Monday is that week, November.
27th, yes.
I'm sorry, November 27th, 6 o'clock, in this room, not in this configuration, but in this room.
Great. We'll move on to acknowledgements by council members. We'll start with Megan.
I can't put Lori on first, it's not fair. That would be funny. Okay, well, congratulations and welcome to Lori. We observed Veterans Day recently, so I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the veterans in our community and offer my thanks for their service. I don't want to mention this every month, but I was reading the old news page of the Penobscot Times recently. It always seems to have something that I'm interested in, but as you all know, I often do. Those news stories just give a fun glimpse of what life was like in this community many years ago. But this month, what I really noticed was that the dates were, they stood out to me. 100 years ago was 1917, 75 years ago was 1942, 50 years ago was 1967, and 25 years ago was 1993. And in all but one of those years, this nation was at war. The last one, 1993, the nation had just been at war, and that is sobering. So I just wanted to take this moment to thank the men and women who are brave enough to risk their lives for this country, and may we all do a better job of keeping them out of harm's way. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, I wanted to second everything that Megan just said, and add one more thing. Maybe we're trying to forget it, but we had a windstorm a couple of weeks ago. Some of us were out power longer than others, but I did want to congratulate the town and its all of its groups, police, fire, public works, and everything for dealing with that as quickly as they could. At least getting one lane open on most of the roads, and I'm sure there was a lot of time put in on that. And I did get a chance to drive a little bit. Couldn't get down Main Street, of course, while we were fixing the power lines, but there were ways to get around town, so thank you.
Tom?
Well, ditto to both of you. Good comments. And to just add one more, we recently had a statewide and municipal election. I saw a lot of interest in Orono, more than I would have expected, and I was pleased to see that. And thank the people who came out to vote.
Sam?
Ditto. Huge turnout at the election. It was really impressive. I would like to compliment Mark Brewer on somehow making magically those 3 pine trees completely miss his house, which I don't know how you did that, Mark. But that was most impressive. I would also like to congratulate Megan Gardner on her novel, A Catalog of Small Pains, winning the 2017 University of New Orleans Press Publishing Lab Prize. So congratulations to you scholar down there. Reading that newspaper is paying off.
I just want to thank everyone for welcoming me, and I enjoyed the process of running for office. I knocked on doors, not on everyone's door, but I very much enjoyed getting out and meeting people in Orono and asking them what they liked about Orono and what they'd like to see different. And I just think we live in a great town with wonderful people.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to unfinished business. I don't believe we have any. Now we'll move on to the consent agenda. I will take a motion to move all the orders on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right. And I'll take a vote. All those in favor? Passes and unanimously. Moving on to new business. Order 17-195, order authorizing the town manager to amend the existing recreational service agreement with the University of Maine to include a project scope for a one-year pilot program with the UMaine Campus Recreation to provide support, coordination, and operational oversight for town-sponsored youth and adult sports programming. And I'll take a motion, please.
Second?
All right, and we will have a presentation, I guess.
Mitch Stone, I'm the Parks and Rec Director. I'm going to put these glasses on because my arms no longer work. So, first I just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody. I know that we've talked about this a couple times in committee and have the opportunity to talk to the public a little bit about an opportunity. I want to start with a little bit with a background so that everybody that may not know kind of how we got here. Last spring, we started with a number of conversations about staffing, work plan, and budget with the council. Out of those meetings, we got a direction, the staff and department got a direction, kind of how Parks and Rec should operate and where we're looking to move. With that direction, it was provide recreation and leisure opportunities for all residents, seek to avoid duplication of programs available to residents, work with partners and to promote recreational opportunities to communities, support and participate volunteer groups, and implement the policies outlined in the recent adopted comprehensive plan, which included utilize parks, playgrounds, and other open spaces to attract families to Orono and provide multi-generational recreational opportunities, build more parks with playgrounds. Use town recreational assets as an economic draw, expand recreation opportunities for college-age students. With this, we discussed a lot about our staffing and our ability to do all these things at once, and staff kind of came up with 3 work plan options. One was to keep staffing the same and significantly decrease program offerings. One was to add 6 hours of part-time staffing a week and keep core, like one program, like youth sport program a season. And the last was add an additional full-time person to allow for sports programming and redirect efforts to meet the other council goals. When we went through that process, council adopted the budget that averaged an additional 6-hour work week, 6 hours a week for the part-time staff, with a work plan that included only core programming. When this happened, we understood it and worked through that whole process, and through the time that I've been here, really wanting to look at service level and listen to people that I dealt with in the community, and understanding that they were looking for other things, we decided that we need to look and see if there are other options, other ways to still meet the need, but also stay within the budget constraints and the resource constraints that we had. So with that, we started to look, and one of the first places we looked was working with the university. We have had a great relationship as far as the summer camp. That grew from a partnership that was created by the fact that we both ran a summer camp. Pretty average summer camp, wasn't outstanding, and we were both struggling to get people. So we took those 2 things and worked together to create one really good summer camp. And in that process, we learned a lot about working together and trying to figure out ways in which we could really expand opportunities, keep the quality level at the right place, and also give the opportunity to expand and get maybe more people, because we each kind of had a unique place. But we did that all within pooling the resources instead of stretching them on both sides. And it's been a success and has grown every year. In fact, this past summer, we're kind of at that max level, a lot of weeks for the number of participants that we can actually accommodate. So we've seen that as a big success. So looking at that, were there ways that we could grow something else out of this that might help everybody involved. And so we kind of I went to UMaine Rec, and Christy, who's here, and I want to give her an opportunity to speak because I think she has a unique perspective on the other side that people don't always hear. But I think we kind of came up with a pilot partnership idea of a one-year pilot to look at if UMaine Recreation could help assist us in providing youth sports and some adult sports programming. In the current model, we have a part-time person that does a great job, but to try to find that balance and the right person to do that, it's a unique skill set. And so we have worked and we're able to get somebody great, but maybe can't work all those same hours in that. But at the same time, that wasn't the only job that person was supposed to do. They were supposed to do other things as well. So, and that person happens to work at the university and has a good relationship there as well. And so when we started to look at it, we said, how do we make this work? And I think the most important thing was looking at how we can use the general framework, develop a general framework based on how we run our programs, because we like how the programs run, we like the community involvement, and we like that it is a community aspect. And how do we work with that to make this work, but in a different way, and pool some resources kind of like we did before. So I think that what we kind of came up with was the idea of UMaine providing the coordination and support and overall operational oversight that we normally rely on our part-time people. They would provide, so almost substituting that part-time person for a much deeper bench. I think at the same time trying to keep the administrative oversight that we've always had, as staff has always had, and be there at the programs as well, just not also running the programs at the same time. I think that with that, we would really look at, we would continue to use the facilities in town. Sign-up process would be the same through our MyRec, use parent and community volunteer coaches. Work with neighboring towns for games that advertise the same way. While also being able to use UMaine Rec resources like the possibility of some facilities or access to college-age volunteers, club sports teams as needed. And I think we would continue to work with the school to get all the facilities that we need, and work through issues as they arise, much like we have all along with the summer camp. Phone calls come in a lot of different ways in that process. The other thing that we talked about, and this came out of one of the committee meetings, was also an opportunity to evaluate. That is something that we do with the summer camp. After each week, there's an evaluation that gets sent out, and people have the opportunity to evaluate that. And I think that would be a smart move to add that to this process, so that after each season, participants would be able to have the opportunity to evaluate what they went through. And I think at the end of the day, our goal is we understand that youth sports does provide an opportunity for community and bringing people together. And if you've been up at the high school on a Saturday morning when we're running soccer and there's 500 people running around and you can't find a parking spot, and you see all that going on, it does provide that, and a lot of people getting together. And we want to continue that, and I think it's just, how do we do that and still not lose some of those opportunities, that service level that we maybe had before, and also with the ability to grow. And I think this partnership would allow us to do that. That's what we believe, and so that's kind of where we are. I do want to turn it over for a second to Christy to have her kind of give her perspective, because I think it's important.
I'm not sure my perspective is anything folks some of you haven't heard anyway. But one of the things that makes me really excited about the opportunity
Christy, could you just identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Christy DeShane. I'm the Associate Director for Campus Recreation at the University of Maine. And I have worked here for about 10 years. What brought me back to Orono was the rec center. But I'm a Maine kid through and through. And I've worked all across the country in recreation departments, in campus recreation departments. And I when I met with the committee, the finance committee earlier, one of the things I said that I think was important to know is I don't think anyone else across the country in collegiate recreation is looking at doing something like this, working with their local town recreation department or city recreation department to provide any kind of programming at all, much less youth programming. It typically is not what we do. And I'm excited to try it, because we have had an excellent partnership, I think, with the town with our summer camp program. As Mitch said, we both had sort of good but small programs, and now we have what I think a lot of our users would say is a great program, and it's right-sized. It's right-sized for us, and it's right-sized for the town. We're not splitting up, you know, we're not competing against each other anymore. We're enriching each other, both by using the collegiate recreation facilities that we have, and then being able to do things very seamlessly with the town resources, getting into the library, the police department, the fire department, the park, the pool. So it's been a really nice transition, I think, for all of us. And my hope for this program would be very much the same, that the face would still look very much like a town of Orono recreation program. The youth sports would still look like they belong here. But the operational, the oversight, the management, sort of the day-to-day muck of it would be run through our department. And what happens now is that with the summer camp program, Mitch gets phone calls, Dale gets phone calls, I get phone calls, we talk. I think Mitch and Dale probably talk every day during the summer. Mitch and I probably talk a couple times a week during the summer. And I envision this youth sports program being very much the same kind of a partnership. We'd be very hand-in-hand working together, especially at the launch of it. But it would be something entrepreneurial for us to be doing, something very different. Although many of the kids and many of the families are going to know exactly who it is when they talk to Dale, because they already know him from the summer camp program and from working here with the town. Dale works with me, so we share him already. And folks are going to know who they're talking to already. It's not going to feel, I think, like a big transition. I think it gives us as a department an opportunity to start using more college students in volunteer roles where they're needed, and then also in an oversight role of the program day to day. We'll hire college students to do some of the work that Mitch and Dale do now. So that'll give them an opportunity, I hope, to build their resume. We're looking to use, hopefully, kinesiology and physical education students to be supervisors in the evenings and during the weekends so that they can build their resume of what they're learning in the classroom, providing some practical experience to kind of bolster that. Where we are maybe weak in some areas with volunteers from the community because we don't have enough parents to go around for everything we'd like to do, we would bolster those areas again with college student volunteers. And I like the idea of partnering parents with college students to give the students the opportunity to learn sort of how to navigate not only the little kid team thing, but also some of the kind of youth sports politics that parents have to, you know, deal with when they're learning how to run a team. So the students would be working with the parents in that regard. We'd still be having as many parent volunteers as are willing. They'd still be doing the same process they do now to get involved with the program. They would just be working more closely with Dale. But for us, this is an entrepreneurial opportunity in some aspects, but it's also kind of more of the same because we've been doing the summer thing for a couple of years now and it's been working. So this feels like a natural progression for us, just in a direction that I would say no other collegiate rec department across the country has done it. So I like it for that reason.
I wanted to finish with the fact that there's a budget attached to this, and it is a little bit different than summer camp, and there would be a cost to the town, but and I've kind of laid it out this way, is if it was to happen mid-year this year, looking at a transition point of basketball still at this point, there would be the opportunity that in the current thing, full year would be the university would be looking for a payment of $15,000. But with that, and also they would also capture all the revenue. With that, though, they would carry the expenses so that we would take the expenses off of our books. So if you're looking at a half year, the net cost to the town would be basically what you would consider a loss of roughly $3,500 in revenue, and then about $67,000 for a full year in revenue. So when you take out the expenses and what you make. Now, when I say that, the cost of the $15,000 would really directly come out of that, what we're already paying for a person. And so that expense is already in there. We would be incurring it one way or the other. And so that portion would come out of that line. And then really you're looking at revenues and expenses at that point is what the difference would be. And you know, I'd like to echo the fact that we really have done a lot of thought into this process and trying to figure out a way to really look at it as a community aspect, and how do we continue to create what we have, because it is different. It is different than camp, because we both had a camp and we kind of merged them, versus this is something that we've been doing, and Dale has obviously been doing this with me and understands what my expectations are, what the department's expectations are of what it looks like. And I think that would make it a smooth transition, in that he would actually be responsible. In that model, and if that was a proposal, Dale would no longer work for us. There would be a clean break there, and he would work solely for the university in a similar, you know, in his role, but also added this piece to it. So that's what I have.
Right. Council have any questions? No?
I have a question. In the whole process, I mean, there's been a lot of emphasis and discussion over the whole thing about what will change, if anything, and I think we've gone over a lot of that. But, you know, we do have clearly passionate people in the community who've been really attached to this. And I think it seems to me that there's a little bit of a perception that there's a loss of control, or some things weren't explained along the way, or that sort of thing. And I know I bumped into some people, you know, on the street, concerned with maybe like the track program. And if they've been, I'm curious, have they been included in the whole process, or I mean, or will that change, or where are we with some things like that? Because I think when people aren't in the know, they might assume the worst sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I've had some conversations with some people. The idea behind this in reality is that there really isn't going to be a major change in that transition piece. It will be me, and in fact, Dale has been through a whole season, so he has gone through this as far as how we manage things. The track program is a unique one because it is a different monster, but it is manageable because there are people that are in charge of that already. It's not. It's more of that is really more of an administrative piece, and a big one. I mean, that program is a specific one that has a lot of back office operational type stuff with USA Track and payments and things like that. So the coaching aspect, the coaches would be the same, and frankly that would operate pretty much the same that it always has. It just would be a collaboration between us to manage and administer it, just like our other programs.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we are maybe being very proactive and reaching out to make sure that they're in the know on this and aren't really facing huge changes and that sort of thing. Yep. Great, thank you.
Does council have any more questions or comments?
Yeah, just to sort of build off of Sam's concern, you know, we've heard a lot of concern from community members who aren't quite sure how this is going to change things. And there was also some discussion sort of about the heyday of Parks and Rec, you know, the golden era of everyone was on a team and there were so many coaches and parents, and that sounds wonderful, but I think it's been made clear to us through this process that to return to that heyday golden era, we would need to budget a lot of money for salary that we don't have. And also the focus of Parks and Rec as a department can't only be youth sports. It has to be one element of many elements. And so in my view, it seems like, I know probably a lot of people hear loss of revenue or something and they get concerned, but in my view, it's as though we are hiring all those people to bring it back to the heyday, but we're only paying $6,700 for it, which seems like a very responsible thing. And so I hear the concerns of the community, but I feel as though giving this a test as a pilot program is something that we may find out works very well for the town.
So two things I heard tonight, which I liked, was pilot program and evaluation component. And I'm really pleased to hear you mention that, Mitch, because I think as we're looking forward, we want to be able to look at some real data and not just kind of our gut feeling that this worked well, but what does the data tell us and what direction does that lead us in? So I'm glad to see that you're talking about an evaluation component.
And go ahead, Sophie.
So you mentioned there's a $15,000 cost in the paperwork here. It says that's fiscal year 2019. There's an annual payment of $15,000, and then you said that the university would get the whatever revenue there were. What kind of revenue are you expecting?
So that number above the top line above the 15,000 is the estimated revenue for those programs. And I didn't mention that, and I can. What we're looking at with those programs would include soccer, field hockey, flag football, basketball, t-ball, track, adult softball are the ones that are based on this budget. That doesn't necessarily mean that others couldn't be added to that.
And so that budget is based on assumption that the participation will stay the same as it has been and the costs will stay the same for the families that participate?
Yep. So there would be no increase in cost. We would keep the same cost price point, even going as far as a resident and non-resident rate as well.
Is there now a resident and a non-resident rate?
Yes, there is.
And how has the program changed in size over the years? Has it been relatively constant, or have you seen it have a trend to one way or the other?
Well, to be honest with you, the 3 years that I've been involved, it has pretty much stayed pretty consistent. There are some dips in certain areas, and I think that's a lot to do with the kids and the number of dips. I think it's pretty much the same when you look at school population to where we see those dips and maybe not as much participation at a certain level, that sort of thing.
And is there any part of this program that takes into account students whose families are not able to support them to participate?
Yeah, we have a scholarship program, and anybody that feels like they can't afford it can apply for scholarship, and we take that on a case-by-case basis.
And what % of the students participating have been scholarship students?
It's small. Usually we have maybe 1 or 2 a season max, for programs.
I'm just new at this, so I've just been reading the number of students in the elementary school that are on free or reduced lunch, and it's way more than 1 or 2 students. And one of the barriers for participation is that there's all sorts of challenges getting to be there and having the child be able to do something after the school when the family is under financial stress. So I guess I would like to see the participation increase of students that need scholarships, because if you only have 1 or 2, my guess is they're not getting the message that there's scholarships available and that they're welcome, because we know, in general, there's a lot of data to support that this is a great opportunity for kids. Besides that, we want to see it for our town, that the parents that maybe can't be here to articulate their fears or excitement about this program are the same parents that probably their kids aren't right now getting involved because the families are stretched. So that I'd like to know that when we get the help of the university and by having this cooperative agreement that we also improve our reach beyond what we have now, and that's part of what the goals would be.
Well, absolutely, and I will say, when you look at soccer, say this fall, we had participants K through 5th grade, roughly 100 kids, which is pretty good considering the population at the population at the elementary school numbers wise. That's a pretty significant portion of that population, and certainly we can always do a better job of advertising opportunities and making sure that we can work with folks to have that.
Might also show that the costs are reasonable at the point. Sophie, did you?
I think the point I just want to make is that the town has been struggling for several years trying to deal with a loss of revenue, increased mandates in other departments, and the rec department has taken the brunt of that as the council has tried to keep the mill rate at a reasonable level. When you look back, this department has been slashed by almost $100,000 when you look at the 2010 budget versus this budget. The message that we got when we went to council is that youth sports and sports programming is very important to a significant number of people in the community, but at the same time, council wants us to be able to turn our attention in other ways, and we can't do that with one single person there. When we have attempted to hire part-time people, it either just doesn't work, or when you finally get the person who's really skilled, they work someplace else, and instead of 26 hours a week, we get 12. And so this was our idea of a way that we could fail fast, fail cheap. You guys will remember that from innovation engineering when we went through that process. But let's try it. If it is too much of a change and the community doesn't like it, then you'll know it, and we'll come back and you'll have to make a decision about, do we up staff in Parks and Recreation and dedicate more money to it and increase the mill rate for it, or do we try something different? And this at least takes, you guys challenge me often to be creative, so we are trying to be creative. If it doesn't work, Christy and Mitch and I have sat down at the table many times and restructured things, and also we've been able to say this doesn't work and it's time to look at something new. So it's not a typical vendor relationship that we have with the university in this arena, and it's new, but I think that it's worth a shot.
Great. Sophie took a lot of what I was going to say, but that's okay. I remember the budget process. It was very painful to go through Parks and Rec and try and figure out how to get some money into it. And I think this is a very creative way to offer a lot of programming and keep our costs low. Council, at a committee meeting, you had said that you would take public input. So if there is anyone from the public that wishes to make a comment before we take a vote.
Good evening, Leo Kenny. I'm not sure how long all of this has been in the works. It sounds like there's been a fair amount of effort in, which I appreciate. I am curious if when we started to look at outsourcing the rec sports, if any gesture was made to the school, just out of curiosity, if that ever would be something contemplated, and seems like a kind of a natural place to look. They do sports for the rest of the, not K-5, but certainly middle school up. They do run the sports. Rec uses all the facilities, so there's already a scheduling component that is involved with the schools. Did we consider reaching out and exploring a partnership? And I think relevant is, or something that probably wouldn't have been known, was that we were going to actually pay additional money for this relationship, and that could change things. As we have a lot of people in the schools. We have athletic directors, coaches, stipend type positions. It would seem that would be a natural place to have looked, and I'm curious if we did that, and if we didn't, what's to stop us from not jumping in during the right now at basketball, which signups just started. What's to stop us from at least exploring that before we jump into a partnership? It just doesn't, if we haven't, I don't feel like we've done due diligence.
I'll let you answer it, Sophie, but I assume that it's because there wasn't enough facilities to begin with for just sharing, so.
I'm going to take a stab at this, Leo. And if I'm wrong, Mitch, you feel free to join. We have a partnership with the University of Maine. It is we do not have that set up already with the school with regard to providing programs. We are looking at not just one person, but a bench of people with the university. And in my experience, we are now getting to a point where we are, I think, rebuilding a relationship with the school that might be a possibility at some point in the future, but when we were going through this process, Leo, it wasn't a possibility.
Having been on the school board, I'm not sure what the rebuilding is. When I was on it not long ago, I never felt like there was no relationship, but so the answer is, I guess we haven't looked at it. We haven't explored using the school. You mentioned we have a relationship with the university. I hope we do have we're all the same community, so we do have one with the school as well.
We don't have a relationship with the school to provide recreational programs. We have that set up here. Our part-time person is the person who works as a full-time employee for campus recreation, so it's a natural fit. I think if we were just going to say we're getting out of the youth sport business and we're not going to do it anymore, then to look around differently would make sense, but if that is not something that we even contemplated.
I guess I would, again, to the council, I think that is something that should be contemplated, and it would encourage us to do so before, even though we're going to look at it and evaluate and assess. I don't know what the immediate need would be to start it during basketball season, which just was just starting sign up. So I would encourage the council to consider reaching out to the school. And I'm no longer with the school board. I have no idea if there's an appetite or capacity, but it certainly seems like it's worth a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Anyone else wish to comment? All right, hearing none. Any more comments or questions from council before we take a vote? No? All right. Then I will take a vote on Order 17-195. All those in favor? Any opposed? No. Passed unanimously. So we will try the pilot program for a year. Moving on to, got my pages all mixed up here. Nancy, what's the last one? I got it. Thank you. Sorry. I knew it was Rob, but Order 17-196, order authorizing the purchase of a Matal Plus front-end loader mounted plow for $19,090 from Allied Equipment of Rockwood, and a Fisher 1.5-yard polycaster material spreader for up to $4,320 with funds drawn from the capital equipment reserve. I'll take a motion, please.
Move approval.
Second.
All right, Rob.
Good evening, Rob Yerxa, Public Works Director. So as we discussed, as we developed the budget for this current fiscal year, we talked about making some operational changes at the Public Works Department associated with the length of shifts that we ask our staff to work during winter weather events. Previous to this season, the approach has always been once it started to snow and we got called in to work, we were there for the duration of the storm, to some varying degree depending on severity, of course, and all of that, but that would lead to plenty of different occasions where we would work 24-hour plus shifts, asking people to work through the night, that day, and often into the evening of the night before of the next night. And that just presented to me some pretty serious safety issues around tired workers, large pieces of equipment, occasionally in pretty rough weather conditions. So it made sense to make this move. In developing the plan for this change, it was clear that there were some areas where we could make improvements to help mitigate the impact of these operational changes to the level of service. So what it looks like out there to the resident on Main Street, or for that matter, North Main Avenue, or any town in any street in town. And so there are a couple of primary things. One of them was making some changes, upgrades to equipment to help us be more efficient and safer during the plowing process. And it made sense for us to start with some of our newer, recently acquired equipment, primarily the front end loader, which we just purchased this past year. One of the challenges that we have, particularly in the downtown area, but also with the school, plowing the schools, any of the larger parking lots, you can't just cast the snow to the side. You have to scoop it into an area with plans to haul it off later, or put it into an area where we can leave it. Down in the Main Street area, we don't have places where we can cast off the side, so we carry all that snow down below the business district and make piles and come back and pick them up later. That can be a rather arduous process with a smaller plow, or any kind of plow that's not designed to scoop, because you're trying to take snow from what's basically, in front of the business district and take it a tenth of a mile down the road. And that leads to many different, multiple passes, and conditions that aren't the best at times. The front end loader plow that I'm proposing that we purchase has it's a base width of 10 feet, but then has wings that we can actually articulate that could potentially go as wide as 18 inches. These doors are 4 feet wide, so 18 feet, excuse me. So you can scoop with it, you can move it around so it acts more like a plow, so you can side cast. And I can see us in many different situations turning what used to take us 10 plus trips through, particularly, I keep going back to the Mill Street area, where it used to take us multiple trips to get through there. Now we're going to plow, we could plow it with this front end loader in 2 or 3 passes, which will make us much more efficient and safer. And if you reduce the number of passes you're going to obviously reduce the risk of either damaging equipment, or sometimes it gets pretty busy down there, and damaging parked cars, all those types of conflicts that we try to avoid. So the purchase of the front end loader plow for $19,000 will be the biggest impact. The second one that we addressed was having a smaller, more versatile way to distribute salt in smaller parking lots, particularly in the downtown area and around the town office area, where a big truck that's set up to distribute salt along the center of the road can be a little cumbersome at times. And so the spreader which will mount on our newest 1-ton pickup, will give us a lot more versatility and be able to put the salt where it needs to be, reducing salt waste, but also reducing the effort required to get salt where we need it, which makes us more efficient and able to hopefully, again, mitigate that change in service level. So both pieces of equipment, I hope, will help us to, again, mitigate that impact as we work through these operational changes.
Sophie?
I would only add, as we discussed with the Finance and Operations Committee, that it is savings in projected expenses out of the capital equipment reserve account that would fund this. So we're not taking out any more than you had projected in FY17 or 18. This is the result of savings that we've seen in purchases this year.
as you said during the meeting, Rob shouldn't be penalized for coming in under budget.
Sounds like it'll reduce your overtime costs during storms also.
Yeah, that will also be part of it, yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
I just want to say, we talked about this for quite a while at the Finance Committee meeting a week ago, and I think it makes perfect sense to go in this direction, and having a split shift of work seems like a very logical way to go, and this makes it a much more efficient operation.
Anyone else have any questions or comments for Rob? All right, I will take a vote on Order 17196. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Hopefully that doesn't mean snow's going to be here really soon.
Oh, yes, it is.
All right, moving on to item number 10, future agenda items and items of concern. Only for this evening will I start with you again, Megan, and then Lori, you're on notice next month. Megan, you don't have any? Tom?
Well, we were just talking about Maplewood and the Sailor development with some questions. And I was down there the other day, and we allow parking on both sides of that road, and it's really not wide enough for that. It gets scary to get through there. So I know we've made some other roads parking on one side. We probably ought to look at this one too.
I will tell you, I have a list that is gone through vetting at the police chief and the public works director of several streets in town, and I think we could bring that list forward. It would seem, regardless of where we go, people are going to be unhappy, and so it would seem to me that we should approach it in a more comprehensive fashion than just a road at a time. So I'll bring that list forward to committee.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom. Tom?
All set.
Sam? Lori, any items? Nope. Okay. Moving on to public petitions. I don't believe we have any. Public comments? Susan?
Got a couple comments. Susan Whitmore. First, I would like to congratulate and welcome Councillor Member Lori Osher to her new position. And my other comment was simply to those who celebrate the holiday, I'd like to wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much, Susan. One item you have a letter that Sophie made copies of for everyone. We are going to take this up at a community development meeting in the near future, so we will deal with that later. Did you have a public comment, ma'am?
I do. Belle Ryder, Assistant Town Manager, and I just want to make sure everybody is aware of the annual Senior Citizen Thanksgiving dinner that will be held this Thursday. And for those who can't get out to the dinner, which is held at the Birch Street School, you can call the town office and ask to have it delivered, and our police department delivers it. This year we are renaming the dinner in honor of Scott Scripture, who passed away this April, and he was a driving force in making sure that everybody who needed a dinner delivered got it delivered, and that he took care of everybody out there. So we are pleased to be able to name this dinner in honor of him. So it will be this Thursday from 4 to 5:30 at Birch Street School, or delivered to your house if you can't make it there.
We've had some confusion, though. People have to actually call the town office and let us know that you want it delivered so that we can deliver it.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Any other public comments?
Stuart Dexter again, 3 Fernwood Street. I'd like to probably bring up something that's supposed to be brought up somewhere else. One of my favorite subjects is taxes. Number one, the country club. Now, I read somewhere where 2 years of real estate taxes has not been paid, and there's a new owner, and I guess there's still some taxes here. My question is, have the country club paid their past real estate taxes?
Last I have checked, no, Stuart. I would tell you that there is a process prescribed by state law where a lien is placed on the property. We just sent out the 45 to 30-day notice of automatic foreclosure. I signed 2 for the country club. So if they don't pay by December 22nd, then the town will own the country club.
Now, as I understand it, I'm talking about the previous owner. This was a good business decision on his part that he pays the property tax 2 years later. So you said, what year are these that you were just talking about?
So these were property taxes for fiscal year 16. So they were assessed in 2015, due in September of 15 and February of 16. Under state law, you have to wait a period of time to be able to lien it, and once you lien it, it has to sit for 18 months. So the foreclosure process is prescribed down to the day in state law.
So he, the previous owner I'm talking about, I assume, what, there's 3 years of?
It's 16, 17, and 18, yes.
Okay. Since I don't know who the owner was, but apparently he feels this is a good business. I'm wondering, are there any other businesses in town that take up this same procedure of running their business?
I don't see it like that. Every once in a while, we might have, if you consider rental property a business, we have somebody who owns several lots that oftentimes I'm sending lien notices to, but we cannot preempt state law in this regard, so we can't make a more constrictive process for securing the lien. The one thing I would want to make sure you understand is that the lien is on the house. It doesn't live with a previous owner. So even if the new owner comes in, if he doesn't pay it, the town still owns the country club, as an example.
Part of the recreation item that you people already talked about.
The other issue is that you do pay interest on any tax that you're behind on.
I would assume so, and
right.
Maybe there should be a penalty involved also, like other taxing authorities, like the Internal Revenue, always charge you interest, but they also always add a penalty too. Another question I had was, and I know you can't answer it off the top of your head here, but about how many taxpayers are delinquent on our last tax bill that came out? I mean, is it a large number or a few? Or?
I wouldn't say a large number. I think we were collecting at 48% of taxes, which, if you consider 50% was due. So, I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape. We have consistently been in that 97% collection rate overall for a year. To give you a sense on the real delinquents, the notices I just sent telling people that if they didn't pay us by December 22nd, we were going to own their homes, I sent 23 of those notices out. And several of them were 2 parcels to 1 owner.
One other item, I don't know if it can be done, but the town seems to go out after businesses to come in. Is there some way that they can be made aware of that we don't like this type of business? I mean, I'd rather see some business not come into town if they're gonna come in and say, well, we're not gonna pay our taxes for 2 years. Let the residents pick it up.
Yeah, I don't think we have a big problem with businesses not paying, Stuart. We've had some perennials that have had difficulty, and I've watched them bring it back to current and really make an effort. I think our small business owners are really trying. I think the former owners of the golf course really liked that front page splash about they're not paying their taxes anywhere. But when I look, I don't see in general that happening. And any place where we have an economic development incentive for people to come in, they have to pay their taxes before they can get the incentives. So that, you know, anybody that has an annual incentive. So we're trying, but we're really constrained by what the state law is.
Yeah. My last statement or question would be, and again, it can't be answered, but what if all of the taxpayers in Orono decided, well, we're not going to pay it for 2 years until they say they're going to take our property? What happened to the town?
It would stop.
It would go bankrupt. So we've got a little less than a year of operating expenses in the bank, and we would have to reallocate a lot of money that's been assigned for other purposes to operate. I think if we saw a major dip in collections after we passed a budget, we'd be back in front of council starting to cut services to be able to go down to bare bones. And when people don't pay, if a significant number of people don't pay, you have to consider that when you're putting your budget together, and it increases the cost for everybody else.
Okay. The only other comment I made maybe a year and a half ago, I made up the list of the top 20 towns and cities, and Orono was number 1. I'm going to be updating that, give you people something to look at before you go into the next budget. But I have noticed there are more towns that have a higher tax rate, but they're very small towns. I can't understand. I don't even know if they're considered the towns, but they got 500 or 600 residents or whatever. And then there's 3 or 4 other towns, I don't know if I made a note out of it before, were the mill towns that lost their mills, and they lost their mills and yet their tax rates went up. I can't figure that out, but I know they needed more money. But anyway, those are my comments. So just a friendly reminder that taxes are always on my mind.
Thank you, Stuart. I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone, and a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.